Hey, Dean, welcome to the CEO Speaks podcast. Thank you for joining today. Looking forward to our chat here and looking forward to exploring what you guys are doing over at Axonius. Why don't we start with how you became a CEO? Nobody goes to CEO school. So you either have to do all of the jobs and then you become the CEO, or you are the CEO day one. So why don't you start there, and then we'll kind of take the tour around your journey here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited about the conversation. I think, like many of the other CEOs you talk to in cybersecurity, I think I became a CEO by necessity, not by choice. And if I can really tell it in a nutshell, it's because I saw a gigantic problem that nobody else felt as passionate or was as deeply embedded or invested into it as much as I was. And when I talked to who are now my two co-founders in Axonius, we realized that the best thing for us as a team would be that I would be CEO. But to tell you that I ever wanted the job or that I enjoy all parts of it, unfortunately, I can't say that. There are parts of it that I enjoy, but I think that the most important thing about it, being a CEO is the mission that you're on. If you believe in the mission, if you find meaning in it, that's the only way to feel that regardless of the hurdles or the stress or the challenges, it's all worth it at the end of the day. So I can also tell how we got to that point, but that was my short answer to how I became a CEO.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. As a founder myself, it was really fun building the product. It was really fun finding the market. It was, like you said, very passionate about solving the problem we were trying to solve. And then you get to, okay, well, how are we going to run a business? And my co-founder and I also had the same kind of question, like who wants to go do the day-to-day operational side, right? And that's different than, coming up with a great strategy and really like being passionate about that. So I think, a lot of founders find themselves in the role of CEO because they will wake up every day and make it happen. And
Yeah.
that's the challenge, and that's the grind. CEO can be a really fun role. It can be very challenging because you have your kind of fingers in all the pies. You have a set of investors, which is one set of conversations. You have customers, you have partners, you have employees. But at the end of the day, like, everyone is your customer, and you are kind of in charge of everyone and nothing at the same time because you have a lot of customers. Well, all right. Well, Dean, tell us a little bit about Axonius. Tell us a bit about how you guys started it, why you're so passionate about it, and why you're still passionate about it today after doing it for so long.
Yeah, so I've told this story many times, but it's still valid today. And if you haven't heard it, the way it happened was I was working with a very, very large company in North America. I was in their headquarters in the Midwest. And after working with that security team for a couple of days, we discovered something in their network, right? We saw something use a credential that was a trap that we put there on purpose. They use that credential to run and execute code on a machine that we put there. And all the IOCs of what they were doing, we looked them up, and it was a group that's already been researched by a lot of other companies before us. And it was one of the APTs that all those groups that researched this threat associated with the Chinese government, right? So we found in their network this APT from a Chinese threat actor, a state-sponsored Chinese threat actor. And we knew 100% this was a threat because who would take a credential and use it to run code on a machine that nobody knows about was put there as a trap for that purpose. Mm-hmm. So we had the IP address and the host name of the machine where the attack came from, right? This is where the infection is. And the thing you do in incident response is you take that machine, that IP address, that host name, and now you want to look into it, right? You want to see files, you want to see process activity, network activity. That's the starting point of doing incident response, to research what the threat is doing, try to map it out more. But when I went to the team and I told them, hey, what is this device? What is this computer? Who owns it? What's managing it? There were no answers. They had no idea what this device was. And to me, that was insane because they are one of the best funded security programs in the world, and they have all the latest and greatest technology, and yet they couldn't really understand how to access or what is the purpose of something in their network. And the more I talked to them, I realized this was not something that was unexpected. This is something that they live with every single day. And it's not because they weren't doing their jobs well. It wasn't because they didn't have the ability to get the right tools or the right processes. It was because it was an unsolved problem for every organization. And I would go to other security and IT practitioners. I would ask them, do you know how many devices you have in your environment? And everybody gave me the same kind of answer. They either said, I don't know, or they gave me like a crazy wide range that asked them, how did you get to that range? And they would tell me, this is our estimate. We don't really know. To me, that means the same thing. And the more we spend time since that point of thinking about why does this happen, today we're realizing that this is true not only for devices, this is true for every asset, quote unquote, in your infrastructure, right? And those are also identities, those are vulnerabilities, those are permissions, those are licenses, those are installed software, those are SaaS applications, and the list goes on and on. Really understanding what's in your environment is something that is still an unsolved problem, and yet I would think that every person would agree with me that is the foundation of doing anything else in your program.
Got it. So, I think that's a daily decision that a lot of companies make, right? Like, do I want to protect this? Do I want to put the investment in? Where are my assets? Maybe walk us through some of the conversations you have with customers with different size of security programs and also the different types of customers who have different appetite for risk versus investing, right? Because I think everyone is hit every day with knowing that they have vulnerabilities. They know they have gaps. There's only so fast people and now AI can kind of move to fill those gaps. How do you see customers prioritizing and building their security programs with your type of technology?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. When we started, that story that I told was what we thought was our customer profile, right? Like very large organizations, very complicated environments. And we went after building something. The initial product was just to show them the list of devices they had, right? Just servers, laptops, endpoints, also in the cloud, right? Like virtual instances. And we start from that, but very quickly we realized two things. Like I said before, once you have those list of devices, then people told us, show me my list of identities, right? Like, okay, now I see that device that you guys talked about that might be infected. I want to do incident response on it. Now I want to see who owns it, who's logging into it, right? And I want to see who that person is. So I want to see not only the devices, I want to see the identities, but also now there's this very valuable thing, which is the relationship between those two assets, right? Like which identities are using which devices and vice versa. And then they told us, look, can we see the vulnerabilities on the devices? And then that's also another relationship. And then let's see the networks which these devices are on, and continues. So it started to expand to more and more things. And the second thing that we realized was that this is not just a large company problem. This is a every company problem. And I remember in our first year of selling the solution, I did a webinar with two of our customers. One was from a hedge fund in New York, and the other was from Schneider Electric, which is one of the largest manufacturing companies in the world. Over 100,000 employees, gigantic. They're a manufacturing company that makes IoT devices that is one of the marquee cloud customers, right? Like they have everything under the sun. And yet on the other hand, you have like this 300 employee hedge fund. And I was doing this webinar, I was asking them questions around cyber asset management. Like, what are your challenges? Where do they surface? How do you treat your audits? How do you treat your incident response? How do you treat your red team and pen test? How do you do patch management? All the things that are the foundations of every cybersecurity framework. And the funny part was they gave the exact same answers, right? Like, obviously they have very different, they're in different verticals, they're in different scale, they're in different footprint. But when it came to what Axonius was providing for them, they said the exact same problems and they were looking for the exact same solutions. And today, Axonius has close to 700 customers of every size, every industry, from startups to Fortune 500s to federal agencies, and everything in between, of every vertical and also every location, right? We have customers in Asia, in Europe, in the Middle East, in Latin America, and obviously the US. And we've realized this is a universal thing that organizations need, regardless of their size. There's definitely a maturity level that they need to get to, right? If you don't have endpoint protection, you got to do that first before you get Axonius. But actually, if you do want to deploy endpoint protection, maybe Axonius is one of the ways that you can guarantee that, because that's one of the use cases that we help organizations with, right? So we learned over time that this is a universal problem that every organization has. And the funny part is when we turned on Axonius on our own network, right? We have our own security team that is funded with millions and millions of dollars, right? They're a real important part of our business, because we want to eat our own dog food, we want to use our own product, but we also really care about our own security because it's important to us and to our business. When we turned on our own product on our own environment for the first time, we also discovered stuff that we were shocked about. And it just goes to show that it doesn't matter how much you're aware of the problem, until you have the tool to be able to solve it, you're never going to know what you don't know.
Yeah, that's a good comment. I think that's kind of the challenge. Like, everyone only has so much time in the day to go prioritize things. So, maybe walk us through how you work with customers, prioritize the challenges and maturity levels, because I think that is the biggest challenge, right? A lot of companies have different resources, different talent, different skill sets, and that skill set is evolving and changing really fast. So maybe walk us through the type of maturity you see customers kind of at the beginning of their journey, to customers in the middle of their journey, and the customers at the end. And then how do they think about their security program, before and after Axonius? Like, what are they doing from a people and process perspective? Maybe you can shed a little light on that. I think that would be helpful for our CISO audience.
Sure. The first thing that usually happens is there is a reason why they start talking to us. And usually that reason is some event or incident or something that makes them realize they can't live with what's been happening so far, or maybe some colleague recommended the solution to them. We have an extremely high net promoter score. It's always in the 80 plus, which is the highest I've ever seen for a cybersecurity product. So there's something that, because we're this realignment over this very, very old problem, it's not like you've moved to the cloud and now you're looking for a cloud security solution of a CSPM or CWPP or whatever. This is something that you've already been living with for a while. So this reason to talk to us has to trigger something. Something has to be triggered, sorry. It could be, like I said, a colleague. It could be you failed an audit. It could be you got hacked. It could be you're making some acquisition in M&A. It could be because you've just stepped into an organization and you're trying to get visibility. We have CISOs who have been with us for 4 or 5 different organizations, right? Because every time they come into an organization, we're the way that they understand what's going on for the first time. So once they do that, they want to, like I said, get visibility first. They use our solution, which is all based on adapters. We don't scan their network. We don't install any agents. We don't need them to forward any logs or anything to us. What we have is over 1,000 adapters. These are integrations into the solutions they already have. These could be identity solutions, network, agent, cloud, application, and we just need the API connection or the credentials, and we pull all that data together. And most importantly, we even correlate it, right? So we deduplicate it, we normalize it, we give you a singular answer based on all the different perspectives to everything. So the first thing they get is visibility. What do I have? What is on anything that I have, right? And then we start to show them things that, like we saw ourselves when we ran Axonius on our own environment, we see the gaps in the coverage of things, right? So the first thing is gap in coverage of different controls. Endpoint protection, you're going to see a lot of devices that don't have the agent, or they might have the agent, but it's broken, right? Meaning it's not reporting or it's not updating. It's sort of a headless or zombie agent, which is the most dangerous because it looks like it does have the agent, but it doesn't work. Then you can do the same thing for other controls, right? Missing MFA on identities, missing vulnerability scans from your vulnerability management tool, and the list goes on. And this is usually the first step of understanding, wow, why didn't I do this as the foundation for all these other processes I'm doing, right? And that's sort of the first phase of the maturity of using the solution.
Okay, yeah, just before going to the second one, what are they currently using that they think is solving this problem? So I think a lot of organizations think they're solving this problem. So yeah. What are they using? You don't have to name names, but what are customers leveraging?
Yeah, the way organizations have tried to solve this in the past is either by believing that they can use the same agent to cover everything, which I think we all can agree on. You cannot have a singular agent cover your entire environment. And most of the time, there are things that you can't even cover at all with agents or don't want to cover with agents. And then you'll never know if they're being covered or not. And you're never going to get the information on them if you're depending on just agents, right? The second approach that people do is they scan the network or they look at network traffic. And today we know there really is no network per se, right? People are logging in from home. They're using the company SaaS applications from their personal devices. They might be using a guest Wi-Fi somewhere and working from their managed device. People have stuff running in the cloud that might not be visible to its network traffic. So depending on the network, to be able to see things is just never going to be comprehensive, because again, you don't know what you're missing, right? You don't know which network activity you haven't seen or you're not gonna capture. And the third thing that people have tried to do is around the CMDB. Now, I love to talk to people around CMDBs. And the reason is because they are so frustrated with it. It's like, it's like a therapy session. You just ask them, how do you feel about your CMDB deployment? And it's like asking somebody, how do you feel about the worst season of your sports team? Like, they will go on and on about how difficult and how impossible it is to make it trustworthy. And the reason is that a CMDB, it's sort of in disguise, but right in front of your face. It's just a DB, like literally that's what it is. It's just a database. Mm-hmm. It doesn't do anything besides store the data that you provide to it. And that means that the user is responsible for understanding how to get all the data into the CMDB and also cleaning and correlating and normalizing and deduplicating the data. So it doesn't do anything for you as a CMDB. A lot of our customers who are big users of different ITSM platforms like ServiceNow and Atlassian and Freshservice and others, what they do is we end up being the source of data that feeds everything into the CMDB, and then they have this very good enrichment of their ticketing, of their incidents, of their events. And that brings me to the second level of maturity that happens when people use our solution, right? Now they say, okay, we got the visibility, we got the control coverage of everything that we have, but now we want to make it operational, right? And the operational part is immensely beneficial because it reduces the amount of work and the amount of uncertainty in both the security and the IT sides. And the way it happens is that once in Axonius, you have this very, very contextualized, very deep understanding of an asset on all its perspectives, all the data sources that are talking about it. You can put that data when there's either an event in the SIM, that's for the security teams, right? Or in the ticketing system and the ITSM, and that's for IT and help desk and service desk teams to make that be so much faster, right? And imagine what happens if you have an incident in the SIM that just has an IP address versus telling you, hey, it's this laptop owned by this person running these agents and these software, and it's in this network and this office location, right? So we really make their operational level so much better. And that's sort of like the second level of maturity once people use Axonius after they discover the missing coverage and all the gaps and all that. But then even the third level, and this is the one that's the most magical, the most amazing, is that they start to create the processes based on what Axonius allows them to do, right? And one of the biggest example of that is vulnerability management. So let's take the example of how does vulnerability management look today, and especially what a lot of the industry analysts, you're one of many that talk about this, is the move from vulnerability management to exposure management or continuous threat exposure management. And really, it's something that could be an industry term, but it's also just thinking about how we're maturing in our view of how do we manage vulnerabilities, how do we manage threats. So historically, we've had this very simple cycle of let's scan our assets, right? And then we discover CVEs, which are very simplified technical risk indicators, right? They tell you how bad the vulnerability is by severity, right? Low, medium, critical, high, critical. And then the assumption is you're just going to fix all of them, right? That was the primitive original way of thinking about vulnerability management. But now we know two very distinct things. One, you can't fix all the different vulnerabilities. Yep. So you have to understand how to prioritize them, right? And the second thing, and this is the thing, this second thing that I'm going to talk about is something that I think is still not widespread enough of an understanding, is that the technical risk of a vulnerability is a very small part of understanding the full risk around an asset.
Yep.
And when I say that, I mean, obviously, if there's a critical vulnerability on some random test instance that is in a closed off network in the cloud that only a developer has access to because he spun that whole network up just for himself to test something, do we really care about that vulnerability? Not really. I wouldn't think anybody would be very concerned about it, right? But if there's even a medium vulnerability on our application server that's doing transactions for our customers that's paying with a credit card, that's seriously scary, right? Mm-hmm. Anybody would say, I would solve that medium vulnerability before I would solve that critical one. And why? It's because the technical risk has to come in combination with the organizational context of that asset, right? And that organizational context comes from what role that asset plays in the environment, right? And that data has to come from many different sources. Like we said, if it's an application server that's doing transactions, how will we know that information? Where does that reside? It usually resides in either an observability platform or some sort of application performance monitoring platform. And that's data that has to be correlated to the fact that we found that CVE on that asset, right? And how do you correlate all that data together? There's a really great platform for that. It's called Axonius, right? That takes the data from all the different sources and helps you get that full understanding of that asset. And that helps you prioritize, right? It helps you prioritize because you can take both the technical risk, but also the organizational context of that asset. And that's one example of how, if you have the full context of everything, you can really take your existing processes and adjust them and evolve them to the place where they're taking advantage of all that and making it much more robust, much deeper, and much more accurate, right? And our platform also has not only the ability to read the data from all those 1,000 sources, but also to take the action, right? We can go to AWS and remove the public IP from that asset, or we can go and we can change its IP rules to make sure that some port is closed off, or we can say, the agent that's running on that asset, to, isolate, or whatever it is that the user wants to do, because it's already something that's part of the connection that we have to that platform. So also the remediation aspect of it comes very naturally. So that's the example of like the highest level of maturity. Once you found the gaps, now you operationalize the data. Then the next level is, how do we automate our processes to make that even more usable?
Yeah, I think that's the magic or the holy grail that most end user organizations we're working with are trying to achieve, which is what we have a couple of analysts from American Airlines who call that situational awareness, right? And that's what they call it at American Airlines. It's about taking all of the data from all of the different places and being able to say, is my business okay? Or is my application okay, right? And there's so much work that needs to happen to do that. And it's usually not an automated process. It's a manual process, or maybe you have it in a silo somewhere. And it's the most critical thing. So you invest tons of money to manage it. But if it's not cutting across the business and it's not providing the insight that you need, then it's just another data point that gets lost, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I think the reason it's a manual process today is because it's so fragmented, right? There's nothing that puts all the pieces together and lets you say, if this piece is that way and that piece is that way and that piece is that way, we want this outcome. You need something that knows how to look at all those different perspectives in order to be able to say that.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about observability, like you said, at the application layer. I think a lot of customers have APM. They're kind of looking at observability. How do you kind of tie into the application stack, and how do you think about that from the security perspective?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So first of all, one of the things that we expanded the platform to is SaaS applications, right? What before us were categories called SSPM, that's from the security standpoint. The other category is SMP, which is more the operational or IT standpoint, which is organizations today are using a lot of SaaS applications. And again, just like devices and identities and every other asset, they need to be able to discover them, they need to be able to secure them, and they need to be able to operationalize them, right? And when I say operationalize, I even mean things like, are we spending more money than we should because we have more licenses that we're using, or we have duplicative tools, or we have an enterprise license, but somebody didn't know, and they're using a credit card, and they're just not utilizing the thing we've already paid for. So that's on a third-party application standpoint, right? When we're talking about what you said, which is the first-party application, the things that we're developing as an organization, one of the most important things that the observability and the other DevOps and application development tools on the infrastructure side give us is the relationship between what is this metaphysical, right? This virtual entity, which is the application or a service that we're creating, which is not anything, that has anything you can grab onto. It's this concept that you created by having different pieces that are servicing it, right? Like an API service that somebody's using that we're developing could be a combination of compute instances and different database servers and different networking balancers and routers. So all of them together in this observability platform or an APM or whatever are part of what is one service or one application. And our ability to pull that data allows you to understand what is the organizational impact when you're thinking about an asset, right? So one of the hardest things about patch management is to understand what is the impact of trying to patch something, right? Yep. If I'm going to need to restart something, or something breaks down because it's losing compatibility with something, or if there's some interface change that isn't expected, what is going to be the impact of that for us? In order to do that, you have to tie the patch on that asset to what that asset is servicing. And usually the data of what that asset is servicing is within one of these platforms that tie together what is this asset's part within this application that we're developing or building. So to combine those two things, the vulnerability or the software versioning information, plus what service or application this asset is a part of, those two data points together give us the business impact of what we can do in order to patch or to upgrade or all those different things.
Great. Yeah, I think we see a trend certainly across vendors to be able to provide that business impact or business process improvement. I think that's something that end users have wanted for a long time, and we're finally getting to a point that the vendor ecosystem is not only acknowledging it, but they're going at it full stop, which is great. So why don't we switch over to some of the newer things you guys are working on? Where are you guys going with the company? Tell us a little bit about what you're excited about, both in your market and in the markets in general, as you see with customers.
Yeah. So Axonius has been an amazing journey that includes so many different people that are part of it. For me, just to tell you a little bit about myself, I grew up in a challenging situation, and for me, computers were my passion and they were my escape. And I learned how to program from a book from the library when I was 12. And I got all these amazing opportunities like the International Robotic Olympics and finishing my bachelor's degree in computer science when I was 19. And when I went into the Army, into Unit 8200, where I served with my two co-founders, we had not only amazingly challenging and inspiring technical challenges that we were pursuing, they also had an amazing impact, specifically on the security of our country. And it was amazingly meaningful for me to be able to work extremely hard at something that I love to do, but also to see how that work has real positive impact in the world. And I think that spoiled me or damaged me or whatever word you pick to describe how abnormal I am today. And I think every founder and every CEO needs to be abnormal, because the amount of effort and the amount of challenge that it requires means there's something wrong with you if you want to take that on. But to me, the way to do that is by finding the meaning behind it and feeling that it's worth the challenge, and it's helping me grow as a person. But more than anything, it's helping the people around me that are together with me on this journey to grow as well. And there are a lot of people who believed in me, especially my two co-founders, Ofri and Avidor, who we were together in the Army, and we ended up being part of the team that got the highest commendation award in Israel you can get for non-combat activity for what we did. And when I finished my service, I really wanted to find that same thing again. And to me, in Axonius, when I talk to our customers, to our users, and they tell me things, I'll give you an example. We have a Fortune 50 customer, who unfortunately I cannot name, but they told us when the CrowdStrike incident happened, we were the first tool that allowed them to assess and see where those impacted assets were. And at some point, they got that visibility from CrowdStrike itself. But that initial response, one of the most important and well-known businesses there are in the US, that's what they relied on. They told me that face-to-face last week at Black Hat. And to hear the fact that we were able to provide that for that business, and there was no other way for them to do that, it's amazingly meaningful to us to know that we can help those organizations. And it's true from financial services to healthcare organizations to defense, to any kind of organization you can think of, to know that we're helping them be able to do their job and helping them be heroes in their own organizations is something that I'll go to battle for every single day. And not only for myself, but also for all the people in Axonius, right? We started the company in the middle of 2017. We announced last year we passed 100 million in annual recurring revenue. As far as we know, we're the third fastest ever cybersecurity company to do that. We did it in 4.5 years. And to us, that means that this fast growth comes from the value of what we provide. And I think, even in the latest analyst review of just cyber asset management, just what we're talking about, not even the things that we're expanding into, it's still at a market penetration of between 1 to 5%. So it's really easy to think of the fact that we can be, 20, 30, 50 times bigger than we are today, while still just doing the things that we're doing today, not even counting the expansion of what we have. And then you realize we can be a multi-billion-dollar revenue organization. That means we'll be one of the biggest cybersecurity companies in the world. It'll mean we'll be one of the biggest software vendors in the world. And that means that we're planning everything with a very long-term vision. That means we'll one day become a public company. It means that one day we'll become one of the most important vendors for a lot of our customers, if we're not that already today. And that's a huge responsibility. But to finish off this whole monologue, it comes from a sense of immense impact and meaning behind what we do.
Great. Thanks, Dean. Well, I think this is great. You mentioned some of the incidents, like the CrowdStrike incident. What are some of the other things that customers are bringing to you guys that you're seeing that are impacting them on a daily basis that are kind of creating a problem for them with visibility? Because it's every day it's a new thing, but what else are you seeing out there that customers should be aware of?
Yeah, I think there are many clear examples, just like the CrowdStrike incident. There's also the celebrity vulnerabilities, like I call them, right? The things that somehow always happen on a weekend, and you have to figure out your exposure to instantly and figure out what you got to change. And you can look at our website and our blog post. Every time one of those comes up, we release that to the world and especially to our customers and help them track and get immediate visibility over where they're at. But I want to share two, I'll say surprising things that we've seen that, or maybe they're not surprising, but I think they're not the things that people think about that make them see immense value in what we do. The first thing I want to talk about, this goes back to sort of the CNDB question, is the lack of, or I'll say it differently, it's the lost in translation phenomena that happens in almost every organization between IT and security, right? In so many organizations, IT and security have a hard time working with each other. And people think about the fact that it comes from different mentalities, right? Because security is all about reducing risk, and IT and operations and infrastructure is all about maximizing speed, maximizing scale, maximizing efficiency. And a lot of people think that the conflicts happen because of those different mentalities. But we've seen something that is another explanation to that conflict. And the reason is because people don't have clear visibility, and even more so because those teams usually look at different tools. They never get into agreement over what needs to be done. Yep. And what I mean by that is sometimes, and this is the classic problem, I go back to vulnerability management again, but this is just because it's such a common problem. There will be a vulnerability on an asset, and security is going to find it. They're also going to say what needs to be done, right? You need to upgrade to this version of this piece of software. But then it's the IT side responsibility to do the upgrade. And then there's this constant battle that security wants the upgrade to happen. And then IT says, look, there's operational risks and operational impact that we can't do until you do that. And there's this constant argument around what do we do? And this is not just in vulnerability management, this is in everything, right? It could also be in compliance. Security says, hey, this part of the environment has to be under these controls or under these specifications of configurations. And then the operational side side says no, like it doesn't, and if that's going to really make our job much harder, or it's not really that important, because we don't see eye to eye with you on how you're evaluating the situation. And what we see is that when they're working off of the same data, right? If we take those different tools and we overlap them and show where the differences are, and we give both security and IT the same data to work off of, you'll be surprised how smoothly those discussions end up happening, right? So that's the number one surprising thing I would say, is that IT and security can work so much better and be so much more aligned and in harmony with each other if they are using the same data, and they have no more arguments about, you guys are wrong because we're seeing different numbers or we're seeing different things in our tools, right?
Yeah.
The second thing I would also say is surprising is how much you could end up with the same thing between different security teams or different IT teams within large organizations, different BUs or different entities, right? We have a lot of very large companies as customers, and usually what will end up happening is that those large companies have acquisitions that still run sort of independently, right? They might have their own security team, or those large companies might be conglomerates, right? They have on purpose different business units, and now we have the BISO, right? The Business Information Security Officer, that is acting as the CISO of that specific business unit. And many times, again, because they have different tools or because they have different environments, it will be very hard for them to work well with each other, and they will end up sort of retreating back into their own shell and just saying, look, I can't work real in harmony with all these other teams, with all these other parts of the larger enterprise. And that's because it's so hard to get the data from them. It's so hard. They have different interests. They have different business needs. And what will end up happening is everybody retreats into their own domain and makes decisions for themselves and makes things just a lot harder for everybody. So what we've seen is when we go to these very larger organizations, what we allow them to do is you can keep your own policies over your own business unit, right? There's a reason those business units are different. For example, one might deal in healthcare, and they might have a lot of HIPAA concerns, and then another BU is financial, and they might have like a lot of PCI and FISMA and NYDFS concerns, and those BUs are not going to have the same priorities, right? Even though they're part of the same organization. So one of the things that we built into our platform is the ability to really have RBAC and data scopes. And when I say RBAC and data scopes, I mean RBAC allows us to really customize what every user can do in the platform, right? What actions they can run, what filter they can do, what connections of data they can have. And the second thing is the data scopes, meaning we can really customize what is the data that they're seeing, right? So an analyst in one business unit would only be able to see the assets that they're in charge of, and then the BISO in another business unit might be able to see all the things that they're in charge of, and then security architect in the headquarters might be able to see all the different data assets. And people don't realize how powerful it is when you have one singular platform that allows the different context, the different views, the different scope for each part of the organization, but everybody can agree on the data that they're seeing, and everybody can agree on how to run the processes to mitigate the same things that they're all trying to do at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. All right, Dean. Well, thank you for joining the CEO podcast today. Certainly cover you in our research coming out around software security posture management. So thanks for participating and working with us on that. And until next time, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you soon.
Of course. Thank you for having me.